Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below what the best thing to eat out of a bucket is. I think the simple answer is popcorn. But I got to ask Steve, because we're joined again by Steve Helwick of SB Nation's Underdog Fantasy, covering Houston, Rice, the American Athletic Conference, and so much more. Steve, what's the best thing to eat out of a bucket?
I was thinking, popcorn didn't even occur to me, but there was one thing that I was thinking of. When I was in high school, I worked at Baskin Robbins, and I remember somebody came in, he said, "I want 31 flavors." I said, "I don't know how to serve this to you, but I will absolutely do it." So I found a bucket in the back, and I scooped 31 different flavors, put it into, it ended up being 2 buckets worth of ice cream. And like while he was eating it, I had to store the other one in the freezer. So yes,
Tremendous.
I scooped all 31 scoops into those 2 buckets. So I would probably put just Baskin Robbins ice cream right there then.
That sounds like someone lost a fantasy league or something like that.
No, it's just an adventurous high schooler.
Got adventure. High school kids do the stupidest things sometimes. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. More on that. It's the best place to get lowest tickets on prices lowest prices on tickets guaranteed. I'm all thrown off. The ice cream's got me thrown off today. Steve, on Friday, I don't care if Houston is playing Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs. I'm talking myself into how they win, and that's the thing. How today's episode will always go. I got to admit, this week it's not talking myself into it too hard. I think they got a real good chance this weekend. Some favorable matchups. I got some things that they've got to do to win. I got a couple. I want to hear what yours are. I'll talk about what we can reasonably expect of the quarterback this week. I think we have to expect improvement every week, and then we'll talk some about the importance of winning the Bayou Bucket across the board here. But I got a couple things I want to mention that I think Houston's got to do to win, and we can elaborate and see yours are the same. First, I think they need to give Donovan Smith time to get the ball deep. They've got talent at receiver. They got to go over the top. Second, I think they got to get outside the edge, running the ball on offense. And if you can't tell, both those things involve scoring and scoring and scoring and more scoring. And then third, I think they've got to have the same defensive front seven effort both in a figurative and in a results sense as they had last week. I can elaborate on each of those three, but I'm interested in you as someone who has seen Rice more up close and personal. What do you think are things Houston's got to do to win this weekend?
I think Rice's run defense is definitely stronger than their pass defense, and Sam Houston had a lot of success through the air against them. So Houston needs to take those downfield shots. It's something that Willie Fritz did address in his press conference earlier this week. I think it's interesting that after the UNLV game, I asked him about why they didn't use the running backs as much. And then in week 2, you see him commit to that. He said that we probably didn't use the running backs as much as we should have. Then in week 2, he commits to that. Then earlier in his Monday press conference, somebody asked him about taking more shots. And he said, yes, I agree. We probably should take more of those shots. So I think that Willie Fritz does stay true to his word there. And I do think that we're going to see Houston go a little more over the top. Now, there hasn't been as much time for Donovan Smith for those routes to develop. And there was that busted coverage where they got that touchdown to man-jack. But I think it's worth doing. There was that one where Jonah Wilson would have scored against Oklahoma if that throw was a little better on target. It was Donovan Smith's only incompletion in his first 14 throws, where that was really the only other deep shot that they tried all game, the man-jack. So Houston can't really try to keep relying on 13-play, 67-yard drives to score. They need to do 5-play, 68-yard drives or 6-play, 75-yard drives, just like find more explosive plays to make, because just trying to do quick passes to the sideline and against all these shell defenses and trying to run up the gut, it's not really going to get you too far. Then just another one I have, the defense played about as well as possible, but I'd say this has some to do with the offense and then some to do with the special teams. Is Coogs don't beat the Cougs, and they've already committed 18 penalties so far. I think we've seen 5 penalties on special teams alone. One on week 1, which wiped out a 50-yard punt return by Mekhi Muse. You can't afford to have these penalties that are costing you in the game. So I would say just limiting some of those pre-snap penalties. There were so many times last week offensively they were backed up and second, third, and really long where it just seemed impossible to convert, and then drives wasted and you're punted. So can't afford those penalties against Rice because Rice is a smart team. They don't commit too many of those penalties. I forget what the breakdown was on last year's Bayou Bucket, but I think Rice was pretty good in that regard. So Rice, they play smart. They're well coached. Houston has to not beat itself.
Yeah, obviously, I think Willie's been preaching the Cougs will be the Cougs thing since he got to campus. Frankly, it feels like you mentioned the explosive play thing, and I got to tell it as quick a coaching story as I can. The first couple years I was coaching, it was very much a rebuilding program, and I was this offensive run game coordinator. They'd ask for a run play, I'd give them what I thought would work, and we'd run that or whatever, right? And we stopped running the ball very early on in the season, started going with a lot of passing, and I feel like to me every third play we threw it deep. And I finally asked the offensive coordinator, the guy in charge, like, hey, like every third play we're throwing it deep, they're getting incompleted. What's going on? He goes, but Parker, every fifth play we're moving backwards. And so if we get it deep, we don't have to go 5 plays. I'm just like, oh, like that's the deal. If we're going to make a mistake every few plays and we go deep instead, we take this shot and explosive instead, we don't have to, we can, not let that become a weakness all of a sudden. Right. And I think there is something like you're saying about like, hey, if we do these 13 play drives, that's more chances for holding. That's more chances for a busted this. That's more chances for an incomplete or, a third down incompletion, more chances for an interception. The long drives do give you more chances for the bad things to happen. So why not throw more explosive stuff in there? Again, as someone who's watched Rice, I know that Sam Houston opened the game with an explosive play. It wasn't the first play of the game. It was like in the first drive, I think, if I remember correctly. What did you notice? What did Sam Houston do to get those explosive plays? Was it just hold up in pass protection, misdirection, play action? What was it?
Sam Houston, they were just dialing them up. That first 67-yard touchdown to Quavez Humphreys from Hunter Watson in that game, that was just beating coverage down the sideline. That was just a quick go route where Sam Houston just outraced them. They were just finding space, finding holes in the Rice zone, and really converting on a lot of throws. Hunter Watson won CUSA Player of the Week for his passing performance there. And also, the thing about Hunter Watson, Sam Houston's QB in that game, was he was the team's leading rusher. And he's somebody where, you go back to Matthew Sluka in week 1 with UNLV, somebody who can kind of make plays with his legs as well. Now, Rice doesn't really have that as much in E.J. Warner. E.J. Warner's more of that traditional pocket pass type quarterback. I think he's more similar to what we've seen in Jackson Arnold than what Matthew Sluka. So I don't think Houston has to worry about containing a mobile QB this week. So that's one thing that Rice had that's different from Sam Houston's style game when they went against Rice.
Well, you mentioned the idea of a mobile quarterback with multiple threats. And I actually have a thought on that on the other side with what Houston's doing at quarterback as well. But before we get to that, I do want to remind folks that passion, drive, and patience are what put together a winning championship team. It's also what puts together your ride or die. eBay Motors, everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. Always find exactly what you're looking for and the eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you will need and the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible rents only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. I also want to tell you that if you are hiring for your small business, trying to put together that championship team, you got to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why we got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs to find the tools you need to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you cannot find anywhere else, even those who are not actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not using LinkedIn, you're looking in all the wrong places. On LinkedIn, 86% of businesses get qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like professional on LinkedIn. in. Post draft for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. It's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post draft for free. Terms and conditions apply. Parker Ainsworth, and again, I'm joined by Steve Helwick of Underdog Dynasty and SB Nation site covering Rice, Houston, the AAC, and so much more in college football. Steve, in the last segment, you talked some about how much these other schools have found success in running quarterbacks. And frankly, it sounded like you were saying a thing that could help Houston's defense out is that E.J. Warner is not one. Why do you think that there's some reason we're not running Donovan more? I'll talk more about it in a second, but I think Donovan, while he can throw the ball and maybe underrated as a passer because people have their opinions of him as a passer, certainly, I don't feel like we're using that second threat a whole lot with him.
To be honest, I feel like they are running Donovan too much, and that's how I felt after the UNLV game when I think Donovan Smith had more rushing attempts than all the running backs combined, or at least the quarterback combined with Zion Chris factoring in there. They ran the quarterbacks more than the running backs in that first week against UNLV, and none of it worked well. Maybe it's just not creative enough, and it's just QB draws that are getting stuffed up the middle with not the best run protection, and anything up the middle has kind of been pretty bad so far for the run game, I would say. And there were so many times against Oklahoma where the pass game was working well. Donovan Smith completed 24, 28 passes in there, and you're wondering, why are they going to the run game? Why are they handing the ball to Stacy Snead on their own 5-yard line with 150 remaining in this game when the run game hasn't been working all day?
But they'll never see it coming, right? That's the thought there, and then they get a safety.
Yeah, but I just don't think that.
No, it's fair. That's fair.
I don't think they need to be doing more running. Maybe Donovan Smith needs to be improvising more, but he doesn't have the time. Fair. He doesn't have the time.
Well, that's a different critique. I think I remember him coming in, and I got excited about this dual threat guy that Tech had, and he ran all over Houston. Mm-hmm. You pull up the video, he ran all over Texas. Like he was a good runner, and he has not been that nearly as effectively in Houston. You mentioned his throwing numbers, his passing numbers against Oklahoma. I think much like we saw the defense get great improvement from week 1 to 2, it's totally reasonable to be expecting the offense to be improving as well. And that involves a lot of factors, but it also includes him. He's the decision maker on the offense while he's out there with the football in his hands. He was 24 of 28, I believe, in that game. 24, 28, 260 yards, which is not horrible. It's like 9.7 per attempt. I got to ask, what improvements are realistic to expect at the quarterback this weekend as you see it?
Well, I think you just want to see more of the same from Donovan, but I'd say maybe a deeper throw profile. I'll say, though, when he was 13 of 14 to start, only one of those throws was actually under 7 yards. So he was completing substantial gains, 7+ yards, which is what you want to see out of your quarterback. It wasn't like he was just checking it down for 0 yards or 1 or 2 yards every time. He was getting substantial gains there. So
it looked like to me they kind of shortened the air distance as the game went on. The third quarter, fourth, that was when he's hitting the check downs, the flat routes, the arrow routes, all that kind of stuff. That was late second, third, and fourth, not the early part.
Yeah, I'd say that was more in late third and the fourth quarter when they had 4 drives trailing 14-12 in that game, where all they had to do was get in the field goal range, and that he could have won it with the way Joseph Kim was kicking. But I think that with Donovan Smith, I think that they had a good quick throw game where they were getting the ball out of his hands really quickly. Oklahoma's defensive backs were playing a little backed off, which surprised me because UNLV's were playing a little more press coverage, and you could see that, and they were getting those tackles close to the line of scrimmage, and Houston just couldn't pass deep. So I'm curious to see how Rice approaches this game, because if I'm Rice, I'm trying to press my defensive backs and kind of try to force Houston to do those long throws, because I think Rice might lead the country in sacks right now. They have 11 sacks through 2 games.
So their stats are a little weird because of that TSU game, though. I mean, that's throwing a little.
7 of those sacks were against Sam Houston. They only
No,
have
I'm not saying. I'm saying
yeah.
it's weird. Like it's hard to read because they played. Like I said, they had 7 sacks against Houston, but I don't want to say they would have had none in week 2. But they also played Texas. So I don't know. It's a weird team to predict at this point.
Yeah. So if that pressure can replicate for the Owls this week, then Houston might not be able to let these routes develop and have time, and things might be a little tough in the run game as well. So it depends what Houston's offensive line. The offensive line is going to dictate everything for the rest of the year, and we know that. There's no Patrick Paul. You might
No, Patrick.
Willie Fritz might have to work on some substitutions, see if he has the right guys, test out different positions for players, see anything that works in the rotation, because the offensive line right now is not given Donovan Smith the proper time to throw, which we've seen what he was capable of last year, like in that West Virginia game when he ends the game with 16 straight completions. So right now, had a good game against Oklahoma with all circumstances considered, completing 24 of 28 passes. Most of them were just quick. But yeah, you need to allow him time to scramble around the pocket, get some of those deep balls to Jonah Wilson and company.
Yeah, I think it's easy. And I said this last year when people were writing Dana, and I thought some people were too hard on him. I think it's real easy when things are going south to blame the coach and the quarterback. They get all the blame all the time. And I think a lot of people's frustrations with this offense are just getting shouldered on Donovan in a way that I don't think he's played horribly. I think he needs to play better. I don't mean to say he doesn't need to play better. But like he did complete 24 of 28 balls last week. And he might have audible power. He's not calling the offense, right? What you mentioned the offensive line giving him time to get the ball deep. You mentioned that they've got to be better too. It's a very makeshift unit. I think Pancake Hunter is going to be really good. He's shown flashes. There is a consistency element to this too across the unit. Again, 5 fingers make a fist. I think I've used that metaphor about once a week at this point. What's realistic to expect out of that group as far as giving him time?
I'm not sure exactly. Willie Fritz did say earlier in the season that he was going to play as many players the first 3 weeks as any coach in the country, maybe. And now we're at week 3, so I think we're going to see some of that cut down, and he's going to try to figure out his rotation. I think the depth chart remained the same this week on the offensive line, so we should be able to expect the same 5. So maybe it's just a matter of gelling together and getting more experience together in game that could help them in the future. Now, the thing with the offensive line is one guy misses an assignment, one guy messes up, one guy goes the wrong way, then the whole play's busted. So that's one tough thing about the offensive line is you need to have all 5 guys on the same page at the same time.
Yeah, and I think people forget, and I try to stress when talking about line play, because especially as a run game guy, I like line play a lot. Offensive linemen, before you even include any tight ends or blocking backs, the offensive line is 5 of the 11 offensive players on the field. That's half the team, right? Like any one of them can make a mistake, and it's not the same kind of mistake as if an outside receiver runs an in instead of an out, right? Like those are not the same caliber mistakes, but the offensive lineman goes the wrong direction, the whole play's over, right? And I think that it's easy to kind of just talk about it as this monolith when it's 5 individual players too. I'm not going to go down the line and talk about the mistakes each individual one made, but like Tank Jenkins had a much better Oklahoma game than did UNLV game, right? Like he just did, and those kinds of things I think get overlooked at times. I want to keep talking about the line play, but I also want to get into talk about the importance of the Bayou Bucket in this rivalry, because in the last episode we talked together, Steve, you mentioned not wanting to see this thing go away, and I think there's some strength in that as well. But before we get there, we're talking about making things go away. If you're trying to make that summer fun barely go away, I know I had too much fun this summer. I don't mean to judge anybody else who did. But you got to fuel up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. You can meet your wellness goals thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. What are you waiting for? There are 35 meals to choose from and 60 different add-ons every week. You'll have all kinds of new ways and flavors to explore. Make your day delicious from breakfast to dessert and stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. Head over to factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 and use code lockedoncollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's lockedoncollege50 at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off the next month while your subscription is still active. Visit factormeals.com today. Parker Ainsworth again, joined by Steve Helwick of Underdog Dynasty, all things college football, Houston Rice, AAC, and so much more. Steve, we talked some last episode about the Bayou Bucket as a whole. We talked some today about what things you like to eat out of buckets. And we had a good conversation going on with the offensive line, and I don't want to leave that completely in the past. But I wanted to take some time, too, to talk about the Bayou Bucket as a whole. They played this thing 45 times. 46 is Saturday. 47, I believe, is scheduled for the fall of 2025. And then there's no more Bayou Buckets on the schedule. And moreover, there's not a whole lot of room for a whole lot of Bayou Buckets on the schedule in the immediate 5 years after that. As someone covering college football, what do you see when you see that kind of a thing happening? I mean, you see rivalry games all over the place.
Yeah, Houston Rice, I think, is a really important rivalry. I think behind Georgia State and Georgia Tech, they're the two closest proximity FBS teams to each other. And that's really important to have close games where you can just drive the bus down across town. And I know Houston Rice may not have the fan hatred of each other as an Egg Bowl or Ole Miss, Mississippi State, or even BYU, Utah, or some of these other annual rivalries that are regional or within the same state. But I just think it's really important for regional rivalries to exist, whether it's the tradition, the rivalry trophy. I said that they have a tradition of the Bayou Bucket Luncheon every year, and that's gone back decades. They have a trophy that the teams get to claim on the field after the game. It means something to win this game. This means more than Houston they beat Sam Houston last year in their non-conference slate. They beat UTSA. But this one, you get to win a trophy afterward. You get to claim, as Rice did last year, the city champions. So I think that's all cool stuff that is involved in this rivalry. And it's something that's existed since the 1970s, something that was big when they shared a conference together in the Southwest Conference. And it's just something you want to see persist. It's cross town. It's easy travel for Houston fans to go to Rice, for Rice fans to go to Houston. You don't even have to drive more than 15 minutes to get from stadium to stadium. So I think it's really important that this thing sustains, and regional rivalries are important in college football. It's a shame to see Bedlam go. It was a shame to see Texas versus Texas A&M go for a while, but it's back. And then when you're talking about non-conference rivalries, another one suffering a very similar fate right now is Houston's Big 12 brethren, Cincinnati. They play Miami, Ohio every single year. That's the oldest non-conference rivalry in college football, dating back to the 1880s. And then this Saturday, they're playing for the second last time ever. So, and that's another rivalry trophy. So it's kind of sad to see these games such deeply rooted in tradition kind of fade.
Well, and so there's the tradition, and I don't mean to downplay any of that. I also feel for Rice. Houston spent a lot of the last 30 years kind of in this doldrum state where the Southwest Conference falls apart. The Big 12 is created, or I guess 4 teams added the Big 8 to make the Big 12, and Houston gets left out. And now a handful of teams, including Houston, gets bumped up into the Power 4. SMU buys their way in or whatever, and that kind of stuff too, I guess. But Rice is left out of this time around. And I don't mean to say that they couldn't buy their way in like SMU. I'm sure there's plenty of Rice money. When you've been there before, it's kind of a drag to see that happen to someone else. I also, and I don't know how, I actually don't know your age, and I don't want to guess either, Steve, because I think you mentioned what years you went to school before. But 2011's Rice game, I think, is one of those things where people started paying attention to Houston because Case Keenum had 9 passing touchdowns in a single college football game against Rice. And I know people from Rice don't want to think about that game, but I do think there was an added layer to that where he had 9 touchdowns in a rivalry game, and that kind of meant ESPN was going to talk about it a little bit more, or Fox Sports was going to talk about it a little bit more. And I don't have any metric to this, but there have to be kids that were watching the game, Sports Center, listening to 610 in Houston, or whatever the case may be, and think like, oh, they got dudes at Houston throwing 9 touchdowns. And then 15 years later, we're sitting here, I guess it's only been 13 years at this point, but who knows how old are those kids now in college and looking at Houston and like to go be fans, or the athletes and play. Like there's an impact to that. I think that I losing this rivalry, I think you lose. And I know that case game is historic for a bunch of reasons. 9 touchdowns and 530 yards is bananas. Is there a different Rice game that sticks out in your head as someone younger than I am for certain?
The last two for sure, because the Rice-Houston one was it Nelson Caesar, I think, that had that scoop and score touchdown for Houston to claim the lead.
Ice it, yeah.
Late in the game. But it didn't really ice it because Rice had a Hail Mary that went right down the field, and then it came down to basically a goal line stand. And seeing a finish that close was exhilarating. And then last year, having the game go to double overtime, seeing Rice go out 28-0, that was surprising to everybody, even the most diehard Rice fans, to see 28-0 on a team that Rice hadn't beaten since 2010, that they were just 2 years removed from losing to 37 points by. So to see them go up 28-0, then Houston retakes the wheel, they go up 35-28, and then we have an overtime shootout. And that was a really fun game. I think another one was the 2018 game. This was before I started covering these programs. But I remember Rice raced out to an early lead at Rice Stadium in the 2018 Bayou Bucket. And then Houston just had a late third, fourth quarter takeover with some explosive passing plays to win that one 45-27. So that's
I was going to say, I think Houston still
Bucket.
broke 40 in that game. I didn't remember. Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. So those are 3 ones that stick out in my head, but always fun to see this rivalry early in the season. And I'm glad it's back this year. After I know the first 2 years I was on the Houston Rice beat, they didn't play it in 2019. They were supposed to play it in 2020, but then the pandemic took away some non-conference games. So I've been glad that we've had 4 straight continuous years of this.
Well, and there's a 5th next year, and then who knows what comes after that. Steve, I've enjoyed having the podcast a couple times this week now, but you're really a talented writer. You're writing a lot on college football. What do you got going out this week? What do you got going on? And where can people find you and all that fun stuff at?
Well, this week I'm taking a bit of a break. I'm not trying to do multiple games because I need a little more rest. My body can't handle doing that every week. So it's just Bayou Bucket week going there. So yeah, I'm going to have a preview out Thursday morning on that one. So check that out. And also, yeah, you can see my work on Twitter. My handle's on the screen, and an Underdog Dynasty and a Hustle Belt, 2 SB Nation sites covering college football. Love to talk Houston, love to talk Rice, and I really love to talk all 134 teams. So just really excited for a good week of college football.
You mentioned 134 teams. You didn't quite cover 134 last week, but can you recap what exactly you did do last week before we get off? Because that was a little crazy.
Yes, it was my second week of doing a back-to-back in a row. I went from Wisconsin, and then I took the red eye back to Houston for week 1 and a Friday and Saturday game. Then last week, I started driving up Thursday night to Dallas. Then Friday, SMU plays a 6:00 game at BYU, and that was a very surprising result. SMU didn't score a touchdown in that game. BYU won by merit of their defense, a bend-don't-break defense. They won 18-15. So soon as this press conference ends, talk to Rhett Lashley after the game, and then you just drive to Oklahoma. That was another 3-hour drive. So stayed in a hotel about 25 minutes south of Norman. Then first thing Saturday morning, I get up, I just go to Norman for the game, get to see the atmosphere there, and then I cover Houston versus Oklahoma, another super low scoring game, 16-12. So I didn't see any team break 20 the entire weekend covering back-to-back games. I only saw 5 touchdowns, 2 Oklahoma, 2 BYU, and 1 Houston. So low scoring game, but yeah, and then got to drive back to Houston after that game. So a lot of driving, a lot of traveling.
Covering 4 football games in 8 days. They got to at least score some more touchdowns for you, Steve. It just seems a little silly.
Yeah, I haven't seen a team break 28 this year.
Hopefully this weekend Houston does it for you. Huh? This is Locked On Cougs. I'm Parker Ainsworth. That's Steve Helwick. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, first of all, thanks for making us your first. And you can listen to Locked On Big 12 for all things Big 12 Conference. Drake's doing a great job breaking down over there. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Go Cougs.